On this Wednesday night, alarming new numbers in Newfoundland and Labrador. Never has the province had so many COVID-19 cases in one day.
Going so long with low case counts of COVID led to complacency,
triggering calls to delay the election. Newly released video of the U.S. Capitol riot.
They heard rioters say they were looking for Pence in order to execute him.
The Democrats try to prove former U.S. President Trump incited an insurrection. The slow road to a future with electric vehicles. Why many Canadians are reluctant to plug in. And mission to Mars.
Did life exist there in the past?
What 3 countries hope to learn from exploring the red planet.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin in Newfoundland and Labrador and a cautionary tale for the rest of the country. New public health restrictions are coming into force there after a second day of a spike in COVID-19 cases, the biggest since the start of the pandemic last spring. 53 new cases were confirmed today. 32 other cases are presumed positive. There are now a total of 110 active cases in Newfoundland and Labrador. Into perspective, 1 week ago, there were just 14 active cases. The province's top doctor warns this is just the start.
We continue to see high case counts, and we should expect this to continue as contact tracing and testing continues. We are in for a rough period in the days and weeks ahead.
What's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador is a reminder how quickly things can change and how easily a low case count can suddenly balloon. In tonight's top story, Ross Lord reports on what's fueling this surge just days from a provincial election.
Long lineups for testing are a telltale sign of a COVID-19 outbreak that's tripled in size in each of the past 2 days.
I know there's a great deal of fear and worry about the latest developments.
Students at this high school in Mount Pearl are among more than 1,000 people forced into isolation.
I believe that going so long with low case counts of COVID led to complacency, and we are now seeing the repercussions.
COVID is colliding with Newfoundland and Labrador's provincial election, scheduled for Saturday. PC candidate Damien Follett has left the campaign trail to stay home with his family, including his teenage son, who has COVID-19.
I wish I didn't have to be concerned about anything except my family right now and my friends and lending support to the community.
There are growing calls to delay the election until the outbreak subsides. Liberal Premier Andrew Furey, a doctor turned politician, was already criticized for calling the election sooner than expected. Now he insists it's not up to him to decide if the vote goes ahead.
I'm not a career politician. Ambition is one thing, but primary focus is on public health and safety.
There have been no hospitalizations, and health officials insist they can ensure the election is conducted safely. Election planners are devising drive-through voting for people who are isolating.
The person is not allowed to go inside of a building, but they would certainly be allowed inside of their car, and that as long as our people were properly protected.
If the outbreak keeps growing, so might pressure on health officials and election planners to reconsider. Ross Lord, Global News.
Newfoundland and Labrador isn't the only place dealing with a surge. In North Bay, Ontario, public health officials are trying to contain an outbreak of one of the more contagious new variants. Ontario now has confirmed more than 230 cases of the variants, though the true number is likely higher since genomic sequencing is needed to confirm them. Outbreaks like the one in North Bay, coupled with the slow vaccine rollout and questions about whether the variants can evade vaccines, are causing a whole new set of concerns. Abigail Bimman reports.
North Bay, Ontario was doing well in the pandemic until now. At least 3 cases of a variant are presumed to be among the 19 people who tested positive in this apartment building outbreak, which in turn closed a school.
I have a daughter that was at the school. It's making me very anxious.
I've seen what happened down in Toronto, so I hope it don't happen here.
Adding to frustration, a slow vaccine rollout.
It sucks. I got severe lung trouble, and because I'm not in a nursing home, I gotta wait till the bottom of the line.
They need to get their crap together.
The Conservatives called for an emergency health committee meeting.
We're looking for information on what the federal government has been doing to track the variant spread, as well as to track the efficacy of current vaccine candidates against emerging variants.
Already, many of the companies are updating their vaccines to accommodate for the variants of concern.
A former federal health minister is now part of Ontario's planning, gearing up to track vaccine effectiveness.
As we follow people and line up the vaccine information with other information around what their lab results might be and which type of variant they might have acquired in spite of being vaccinated.
Leaving the question of what going back to so-called normal really looks like.
Even once we're into mass vaccinations, there's going to be a need to continue to be vigilant against variants, against further challenges.
As economic challenges grow.
The economic virus is just almost as bad as the virus itself.
This researchers' team tracks and projects the impacts, including the hit to GDP, under different kinds of lockdown scenarios.
Over the whole of 2021 is an 8% loss over the whole year versus an 11% loss with the on-again, off-again kind of policy.
Losses in the tens of billions, if not hundreds. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today and tweeted that he reassured Trudeau India would do its best to facilitate supplies of COVID vaccines. The Serum Institute of India has a contract with AstraZeneca to supply 1 billion vaccine doses to a number of countries. Health Canada is reviewing the manufacturing processes at the facility. It has yet to approve the AstraZeneca vaccine. The World Health Organization is trying to ease doubts about the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine against the new variants. The WHO says limited data means it is too early to know for sure how the variants will impact vaccines, but they believe the AstraZeneca shot should be given to adults of all ages and will offer some protection. Earlier this week, South Africa paused its AstraZeneca rollout after a small trial suggested the shot may not work as well against the new variant first detected there. Today, South African officials said they are considering selling or swapping their AstraZeneca doses for a different vaccine. Frontline workers in Alberta will receive one-time payments of $1,200 from the provincial government. Premier Jason Kenney says the money will go to those who have put their lives at risk on the job during the pandemic. There are signs the public health restrictions in Alberta are working. Case numbers have been dropping since hitting a high in early December, but in some rural areas, the numbers are beginning to rise. There has been pushback against the restrictions from some small businesses, faith groups, and local politicians. Heather Yourex-West reports.
For weeks, the Grace Life Church has ignored public health restrictions, holding services outside Edmonton with as many as 300 people. It's just one example of the growing pushback against COVID measures coming from rural Alberta. Resistance that could help explain why COVID infections are now spreading faster there.
In the non-city environments, it seems to be higher than it is in the city environments, which is quite the opposite of many other places throughout Canada right now.
The R, or reproductive number, measures how quickly cases are going up or down. Anything less than 1 means numbers are falling. Over the last 3 weeks, Alberta's overall R number has risen slightly, but it hasn't been Calgary and Edmonton driving that number up. Areas outside the big cities have seen their R value surge, and it has nearly reached the point where cases will begin to rise.
So we have to continue with these public safety measures. And critically, we have to be aware that there is now viral variants in the community.
But people in smaller Alberta centres have been getting mixed messages from government. Last month, when some restaurants opened in defiance of public health orders, 2 small-town mayors broke the rules to show their support. And now 2 members of Premier Jason Kenney's caucus have joined a national coalition pushing back against lockdowns. The Premier says that's within their right.
We, unlike some other parties, allow people to speak their minds and represent views of their constituents.
But this expert warns the virus doesn't play politics.
The word of a politician is very powerful, and it's very dangerous because in one way, you're opposing science. On the other way, you're actually winking at those who follow conspiracy theories and say, you know what, it's okay,
Because the numbers could soon paint a very different picture if rural Alberta doesn't change course. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
President Trump put a target on their backs, and his mob broke into the Capitol to hunt them down.
The impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump has released new video of what happened when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. The Democrats are building a case that Trump spent months building a fire before lighting the match, as they say, on January 6th. As Jackson Proskow reports, House impeachment managers presented a troubling play-by-play today of how it all unfolded.
The second man through the window is wearing full tactical body armor and is carrying a baseball bat.
In graphic detail, never-before-seen footage was presented at the impeachment trial, showing how close the mob came to carrying out a massacre.
As the rioters reached the top of the stairs, they were within 100 feet of where the vice president was sheltering with his family.
Senators were shown video of the enraged mob threatening to kill the vice president and Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Where are you, Nancy?
In an attempt to overthrow American democracy.
Because the truth is, this attack never would have happened but for Donald Trump.
As Democrats make their case, they've moved beyond the traumatic events of January 6th.
The evidence shows clearly that this mob was provoked over many months by Donald J. Trump.
They argue the storming of the Capitol was rooted in Trump's persistent lies about a stolen election, a campaign that spanned months and riled up supporters at every turn.
Frankly, we did win this election.
The effort was blatant, carried out in plain sight, and Democrats argue Trump clearly told his supporters where to be and what to do.
On December 19, at 1:42 in the morning, our commander-in-chief tweeted, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. Will be wild. Will be wild."
By the time Trump took to the stage on January 6th, Democrats allege he knew exactly what would happen next.
Because he assembled the mob, he summoned the mob, and he incited the mob.
In the days ahead, Trump's defense is likely to focus strictly on the events of the 6th, arguing the riots were pre-planned, as Democrats allege, and therefore could not have been incited by Trump in that instant. It may be hard to separate that from the jarring images of the day, showing a mob that clearly believed it was acting on orders from one man alone. The number of reporters inside the Senate chamber is limited because of the pandemic, but we know from those in the room that the day started with some senators putting their feet up on their desks and doodling during the impeachment trial. It ended with everyone in the room absolutely gripped by that harrowing new video footage. Donna?
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thank you. Zero emissions, but plenty of hesitation. Coming up, why many Canadians are reluctant to buy an electric vehicle. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is planning to fund nearly $15 billion in public transportation projects across the country.
These investments will support major public transit projects like subway extensions, help electrify fleets with zero-emission vehicles. They will also be used to meet the growing demand for walkways and paths for cycling and help rural and remote communities.
The Prime Minister says the money will be spread out over 8 years and will be a stable source of funding so cities can plan for long-term needs. Most of the money, though, won't start flowing until 2026. Electric vehicles are gaining traction in Canada, but not fast enough to meet the federal government's own targets. It aims to have 10% of all light-duty vehicle sales be electric by 2025 and 100% by 2040. Through access to information requests, our chief political correspondent David Akin has obtained internal government polling that sheds some light on what's holding back Canadians from buying more electric vehicles. David?
The federal government has had incentive programs to get Canadians into both electric and hybrid vehicles since Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. But so far, at least, those programs are not showing the success that everyone wants. Just 2.6% of Canadians own a plug-in electric vehicle. Only 3.6% own a hybrid. Most Canadians, 80%, still own good old-fashioned gas or diesel cars. This data is from an internal government poll done in late November for the Prime Minister's Department, the Privy Council Office. So, what's been holding consumers back from buying an electric vehicle? Answer: They're just too expensive. That was the number one reason cited by 43% of those surveyed by the PCO. Lack of infrastructure, charging stations and the like, was cited by 15%. And concerns about reliability was an issue for 10%. Now, the Trudeau government has been offering subsidies of up to $5,000 for those who buy a zero-emission electric vehicle, and it's in the midst of a 5-year, $130 million program to build more charging stations across the country. The PCO poll suggests the government could ramp that up. A majority of voters in every province, including Alberta, support the idea of federal cash being used to help get consumers into electric vehicles. Just over 71% nationally like the idea, including 54% of Albertans, while 78% of Quebecers and almost as many in Ontario and BC gave the idea a thumbs up. And so, with such strong support in the election battleground provinces of Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia, the PCO, and by extension the Prime Minister's office, knows they've got a vote winner right here. And so, you should expect to see federal cash for electric vehicles front and center in this year's spring budget. Donna?
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. Sister Survivor ahead, what an elderly nun in France is celebrating. The family of a prominent women's rights activist who has ties to Canada says she has been released from a prison in Saudi Arabia after nearly 3 years. Loujain Al-Hathloul was granted probation by a judge in Riyadh today and released to her family. Al-Hathloul was arrested in 2018. She was locked up for things Canadians consider basic human rights, such as driving a car and campaigning against female oppression. Al-Hathloul's family says she was subjected to electric shock in prison and sexually harassed. Her probation prohibits her from talking about her time behind bars, and she can't leave Saudi Arabia for 5 years. She is a graduate of the University of British Columbia. A nun in France has something big to celebrate. Not only did she survive COVID-19, she turns 117 tomorrow. Sister Andre, who is Europe's oldest person, was among 81 people in her nursing home to get COVID-19. She was lucky to have no symptoms aside from sleeping more than usual. Sister Andre is now blind and uses a wheelchair, and she has lived through a lot, including the 1918 flu pandemic and both world wars. She says she plans to celebrate her birthday with a feast and a glass of champagne. Cheers to that. Space Jam next. What's fueling heavy traffic around the red planet? You could call it Mars madness. For the first time, 3 spacecraft from 3 different nations will be exploring the red planet at the same time. Missions from China and the United Arab Emirates are orbiting Mars now, and NASA's Mars rover is scheduled to land next week. Eric Sorensen explains what they're hoping to teach us about Earth's neighbor.
1 and liftoff. 2. 3 spacecraft blasted off for Mars last year. China's Tianwen-1 has just arrived, slowing into its orbit around Mars. A highly ambitious, somewhat secretive mission is the first to include an orbiter, a lander, and a rover. China is the 6th country to reach Martian orbit. The 5th arrived yesterday. The Hope spacecraft from the United Arab Emirates will not land, but will circle to study the atmosphere and climate. It's an historic breakthrough for the Arab world that looks to diversify from its oil economy.
For our science community, this is a large leap for them. They today have a mission around another planet, collecting data for the very first time.
The 2 missions, Hope and Tianwen-1, will be joined next week by a third, NASA's Perseverance. It's a little like rush hour to Mars. All 3 spacecraft left Earth last July. It's a rare opportunity that comes around only once every 26 months when the Earth and Mars are relatively close to each other and the 3 spacecraft can make the 500 million kilometer journey to catch up to the Martian orbit in just 7 months. As the Hope spacecraft remains in orbit, the Chinese will send down their lander this spring. Then comes Perseverance. It arrives in 1 week and it will land almost immediately in Jezero Crater. Here because Jezero was a real lake more than 3 billion years ago, fed by a river and surrounded by an atmosphere that may have supported life. the ultimate discovery.
Did life exist there in the past? Does life exist there now? And could life, including us, exist there in the future? And so a lot of the missions have been piecing together insights.
Perseverance is the first in a series of missions by NASA that will drill into the Martian surface for rock samples that will be sealed and stored, then picked up by future missions and returned to Earth 10 years from now. It only gets more exciting from here. Space agencies on Earth are planning to send humans out to explore. First, a return to the Moon in this decade, and then to Mars in the 2030s. Our first interplanetary travel is just around the corner. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
We couldn't leave you tonight without an update on the kitten practicing law on Zoom. In case you haven't seen it, or maybe you just need another laugh, here it is.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're trying to. Can you hear me, Judge? I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
The eyes make it so good. The kitten is actually Texas lawyer Rod Ponton. He says his assistant's daughter had been using the computer before him and he couldn't figure out how to get rid of that pesky cat filter. He is happy, though, it's making people laugh.
I was having lunch after that hearing, and I was wondering why my phone was blowing up with calls from around the country and around the world. I didn't know if I was in trouble or what was going on, but I finally figured it out. I think I got as big a laugh out of it as everybody else.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. I've been told no more cat filters from me, but we do have this gorgeous shot of the Northern Lights near Stettler, Alberta. There are beautiful spots all over Canada. Please email your Canada to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.